Hey, we're back. We're back again.
Yes.
I had to lower my chair so that I wasn't like flying off the top of the screen.
See, I need to like heighten my chair because I'm too low for the camera.
You're a little low. You're a little low. But if you were any higher, people would be able to see that we're both wearing the same shirt, which wasn't
We're both
coordinated.
wearing the same shirt. Oh man.
Yours looks like you folded it after it came out of the wash. Mine looks like I forgot it was in the dryer last night because I did.
It's okay.
It's okay.
This was not planned. Not planned at all.
Not planned at all. We just went for it. Thank you so much for joining us for Qakbot Security Live for the week of September 1st, 2023. It is Friday. That is awesome. And we're here to talk about some cybersecurity news. So if you're joining us live, go ahead and let us know where you're coming in from. If you have any thoughts about what we're talking about, go ahead and let us know in the comments. We can see those, and we'd like to include you in the conversation and use the points that you bring up. Because the points that you bring up might be better than the points that we bring up because we're just two guys talking about cybersecurity. That being said, it is important to quickly get this out of the way, that the views and opinions that Jonathan and I express are our own, do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Qakbot Security. We're just a couple guys. That I'm going to say, that being said, this is the last time I'm saying that being said. I can't promise that, but I'm going to promise it right now. I'm Tristan Morris.
Hey everybody, I am Jonathan Singer.
Yeah, and we are gonna kick things off. Jonathan, how you been?
It has been an interesting week. I don't know why I keep getting sick. I'm going to just blame children and diseases.
Children and diseases.
Hanging in there. You know what? It was a very busy end of month for all of those sales folks out there. You know my feels. But otherwise, very excited and looking forward to closing out this year.
Yeah,
on Q4 stuff.
It's busy. It's been a nice week over here. We're coming in. We're planning some big stuff coming up on our end, and we are at the first of the month, which means that we are just about 2 weeks away from the next Grit ransomware report, which is always fun.
Exciting.
Always fun to see the kind of research that they are getting up to and the types of things that they are seeing. And to watch the trend line for ransomware steadily tick upwards forever and always. It'll be really interesting. We have some stories this week about that are on the good side of security. I think actually this week is a fairly like positive security story week.
I would say, yeah, most of this stuff is pretty cool. There's some great stuff out there for both victims and security researchers.
Yeah, cannot wait to see those kinds of trends coming to ransomware as well, as we continue the ever forward march of cybersecurity. So all of that out of the way, what do we want to start with, Jonathan? I think we got the first story. This is, I think, our only like negative story really of the week.
Let's just kind of kick it off with how very familiar, if any of you have been following along with our show or keep an eye on what's going on in the world of ransomware, but Lockbit, a popular name around those parts, is kind of re-energizing itself in a weird way, where threat actors are actually utilizing leaked Lockbit code to then bridge off onto their own ransomware attacks, right? This is like, hey, look, I've got somebody else's code that has been gratefully leaked. Now I am going to use this as a foundation for my new criminal activity.
They're playing with somebody else's toys. This was a lot of groups, new groups, over the last I think year or a little bit longer.
Yeah,
right.
It's about a year. They said September of last year.
Yeah. Cropped up though. This is not the first time this happened, right? When Conti had their massive leak, right? A lot of new groups and splinters formed off of that because their code was out there in the wild. So it made it very easy for new groups to just spin up because they suddenly had access to really developed and polished ransomware code. And so when Lockbit 3 also known as Lockbit Black, was released. A couple developers leaked that code as well. And so that has been proliferating across the internet. And if there's one thing that is always going to be true about hackers and adversaries for cybersecurity, right, is that they're always going to take the path of least resistance. So of course they're just going to grab that and start using it. Lockbit's code is and encryption is very well designed. They have been in operation for a very long time, and they have a lot of lessons learned. So that code is I mean, that's a gift to anyone who was looking to get into ransomware.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, when it comes to different hacking groups that are trying to seek interest in this stuff and don't have the kind of development chops or maybe nation state backed interests to really put together their own foundational software for ransomware, for malware, for payloads, for all different kinds of things, taking advantage of some of these more established, we'll call it, ransomware kind of software bundles is going to crop up all kinds of new individuals. Now, we can only hope that most of them won't be successful with the data that they've been able to retrieve, but there will be a number of new groups that are going to have similar but still their own twist on it. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult for a lot of these different security researchers to track down, because it's not necessarily the exact same what's going to come from this. It's going to be slightly modified, just enough so that it looks and feels different, but foundationally, it's got the same fingerprint behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it's also going to be interesting because, you know, obviously ransomware groups are the bad guys, right? But large organizations like Lockbit and others do have strict rules that they want to enforce for their affiliates, the people who they lease their code to, essentially, right?
Rules. I thought there's what's the saying about criminals or baddies?
No honor among thieves. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, that's where I'm going with, and it's showing.
Yeah, but they tend to have rules and guidelines for who you're allowed to attack, things like that. Some groups say like no hospitals, others say no public infrastructure, right? And so these people who are using this stolen Lockbit code now, this leaked code, they're not beholden to any of that, right? They get to just use this, and so like you said, they can modify things if they would like to. Some of the things that were noticed by researchers in these groups that were doing this is that they were enabling things like the kill service, kill process, kill defender, delete logs, those kind of options that exist within the Lockbit package. But very few were utilizing communication with command and control servers. Their ransom notes are all over the place. And so aside from those minor customizations that are being used, though, most of them are just kind of dropping this on the system with their own ransom note and asking for contact through their own private channels, whereas Lockbit would use dedicated infrastructure. And that is that's going to make things also, I think, as researchers track these types of attacks down, being able to look for something like communication with dedicated command and control servers that Lockbit might utilize, and say, oh yeah, we can say that it is for sure this. Now they're looking at it and saying, okay, well, we've never seen these communication channels before. We don't know where this is going. We don't know if you can trust the people that you're talking to, which is another key aspect of dealing with large ransomware groups, is that they have reputations that they want to uphold, which is very strange. It's very weird to say things that sound positive about
and that's why we have our disclaimer.
Yeah, it's like, it feels like I'm praising them, but I'm not. It's just like saying, hey, they have a dedicated command and control and they have a reputation that they want to uphold. They want people to believe them when they say, yeah, we have purged your data from our systems. We're not going to leak anything as long as you pay us the ransom. These new groups aren't, again, beholden to that. And so that's going to create difficulty in response to these smaller groups that are using this more advanced software.
Yeah. Well, we shall see.
So we shall see. That is it's an interesting twist in the ransomware story. But we're moving from that to much more positive things.
Yeah. Here's a spin on this. Well, going from awkwardly relying on ransomware groups, to be honest, to how about a company that we all love and treat with everything we have, Apple Security.
Apple.
um,
Yeah.
so okay, this is actually a story
What a transition,
I
Jonathan.
know, I blew it out of the water. It's okay. Don't worry. This is actually a story I wanted to feature this week because I think it's super cool. Apple's own security research device program, which strangely goes by the SRDP code name, um, is opening up applications. And so if you, that you, our listeners, are a Apple device hacker, Apple's looking for you. So their security research device program um, is a special iPhone that you can apply for that has a ton of like additional features meant for researchers that unlocks really interesting things,
Yeah.
stuff that you normally wouldn't have access to across different things like the kernel, extensions, memory, different services within the device. Very cool opportunity. Fun. So when I was in college, there was another student who would intentionally take Apple to iOS O days and just kind of read the descriptions of them and then rebuild the vulnerability himself from scratch based on the bits of information available as a description, like as just text. And so I know there are some really good handheld device hackers out there. And so here's
Yeah.
your chance at, you know, the median award of $18,000, right? And multiple awards in the $500,000 range. Get at
Yeah.
it. So that's my
Yeah. Apple.
soapbox.
Apple is willing to pay for knowledge around the security of these devices. This is their bread and butter. But it's important to know if you're a security researcher and you want to take advantage of this, applications are only open through October 31st. They select a handful of security researchers. I'm sure it's really not a small number of security researchers they send these to, but in comparison to the number of applications they probably receive, it's probably just a handful of those that end up receiving one of these iPhones. And so this is noteworthy not only because it's the application process for next year's security research program, but also they're opening it up to the iPhone 14 Pro, I believe, is like the specialized
Yep.
device that they're going to use. But they will select researchers based on their past credibility and past work that they've done in the space, not just on Apple devices, but on any device. So if you have any published work, you have a better chance of getting to this. But the other cool thing about it is that they also open it up to education institutions. So if you want to apply for one so that you can use it within a classroom context and introduce students to the different concepts and ways that you would have to utilize a device like this. They've also got that open, which is really great because when you're looking at the current cybersecurity skills landscape, right? I think a lot of the gap that we tend to see, or a good amount of the gap that we tend to see, comes from the fact that sometimes these tools and these platforms are in a walled garden until you're working for a company that already owns them. And if a company already owns those tools or already owns those platforms, they want you to already know how to use them. They don't want to have to necessarily teach you. So it creates this catch-22 in cybersecurity skills. So it's really cool that Apple is also opening this up to education institutions.
So, this program has been around for quite some years now. Right? Apple Security, being kind of a public face where they accept different types of bug bounties, different types of researchers to contact them, and very generous payouts. Specifically, their device program has been around since 2019. And this program alone has located 130 high impact, and that's not the mediums and lows that are also discovered, but 130 specifically in the high severity vulnerabilities. And so it has been wildly successful. I know that there are individuals in the bug bounty world that make a living off of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so being a big company that does support the interest of bug bounty, we do think that that is very cool. or at least I do, right? I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I think it's cool. I like bug bounty programs because it's the way of saying, hey, security researcher, we understand that people are going to poke and prod at our systems, and if you do the same too, we just want you to let us know about it. We appreciate that kind of responsible disclosure
Yeah.
that this is going to bring along. And if you feel like you are doing cool things in the security space and hacking into things, please feel free to comment about it below. We'd love to hear what you've been up to. Please don't post anything illegal.
Yep. And they, they do also, I forget exactly which article it was when I read a couple about this that I saw it in, but like there is some also extra legal protection that comes with using an SRD device. But Apple does make it clear on their eligibility and sign up page that ultimately their goal is to protect their users. So if you find a vulnerability without using the SRD, they still want to know about it, and they will still take that and consider it, and not necessarily bring the hammer down on you, as we have seen strangely companies do in the past. We have seen companies before, when someone reports a bug to them, or finds a way through their system, we have seen legal action be taken in the past, which is very strange. I think. But that's our first bit of good news. So if you're a security researcher, jump on that. In fact, I'm sure there are probably already some people at GuidePoint who are going through that process. But in other good news, we continue the. I'm trying to find the article right now. We continue the trend of action against threat actors and adversary networks, because the FBI claims that it has dismantled the Qakbot botnet that was infecting hundreds of thousands of computers. And they are claiming it is the largest ever botnet takedown. One of the largest, US-led disruptions of a botnet infrastructure, it's funny, every time there's an article about the FBI or another group taking down a botnet, it seems to be one of the largest.
Yeah, and now coming to us from the Washington Post, this was announced on Tuesday, so earlier this week, as part of a multinational operation. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of computers, as you mentioned, were involved in this. And what's interesting that I found is that the fact that Qakbot has been around for a while. In fact, it was first discovered in 2008 and has been growing since then. This particular botnet was said to have, let's see here, about 700,000 victims identified worldwide, with 200,000 of those alone here in the United States.
Yeah. And so, the interesting thing about this botnet, I think, or the most important factor about this botnet, is that it was used to enable some of the larger ransomware groups that we have, that Grit has tracked over the course of the last couple of years, that we've seen in the news, specifically Conti, which eventually broke up because of the leaks of their source code, and then split into a lot of smaller groups, which means that those groups also probably used this botnet as part of their infrastructure. REvil, and a few others, and those are organizations that were known for targeting hospitals, schools, municipal governments, and keeping that sensitive data and using it for ransom. So a botnet of this size being taken down when it was enabling such large operations is a huge move within the cybersecurity space. It's going to be interesting to see what groups end up scrambling and where they scramble to.
Yeah. By the way, thanks, Mark. You are correct in the sense. I do agree that these things will continue to grow and be bigger and bigger over time. What I really appreciate the most about how this was taken down was the tactic behind it. Now, we're never an advocate for hack back, but this was pretty cool. What happened is the affected victims, right? People that had no idea that they were part of this botnet because of this malware on their computer, were basically triggered an uninstall package. So they had no idea that the malware that was running on their system was tricked into receiving a file that it downloaded. It directed the computer to uninstall the malware and remove themselves from the botnet, all in one fail sweep. So it's like injecting yourself into the payload distribution of this massive botnet. And it just so happens that the payload that was pushed out was the undo button.
Yeah. They gave it its own kill switch. They programmed a kill switch in and then activated it. Also, monetarily, along with this botnet takedown, they seized some 8.6 million in various cryptocurrencies that was stolen related to the operations, and it was returned to the victims. But that is a small kind of amount compared to the $58 million in ransoms that administrators of Qakbot received from victims between October of 2021 and April of 2023. So that's a large amount of cash to be flowing in, and they have again just they managed to very what is the word that I'm looking for? It was cool. It was really cool the way they took down this botnet and managed to take it over. And you know, Mark, like you said, and call that with Mark's comment. Yeah, it is true. These things are just going to continue to get bigger and bigger. Right. It will always, as time marches on and cybersecurity incidents and ransomware groups and stuff tend to consolidate and grow their operations, we're going to continue to see the largest ever will always be the tag as these things move forward. Joshua
I want to call yes, benevolent ware. Absolutely. And you know
that's
what? This isn't the first.
That's my favorite video game development company.
Is it? I didn't even know it was a real thing, but good job.
No, it's not.
Okay. You know, this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of stuff happen before, where a government entity or a good security researcher or a team makes their way into a massive controlled network that's used for ransomware and other things, and they're able to you know, discover all of the victims across the internet, and furthermore push out an uninstaller package and disable the entire botnet as a whole. And so having kind of playing off of past events similar to this, very good move, very cool trick. And
do it again.
Do it.
Do it again. It was very cool. Well, the cybersecurity equivalent to doing a backflip.
Yeah.
Do it again.
So talking about good people doing really cool things, this does help lead us into our next story.
Our final
which
story
is
for the week.
Yeah, it's coming to us from Security Affairs, and it's focused on a research group that releases a free decryptor for the key group ransomware, also known as key group 777, right? And you found this story. Do you want to tell a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work a lot with the Grit Guidepoint Research and Intelligence team on the ransomware reports and stuff, and that's a large part of the work that I do here. Every month I have to go through that report and edit it and read it, and I get to ingest a lot of this information. So this story was really interesting to me. The free decryptor that was released for this key group ransomware. It's interesting to me because this is a smaller ransomware group, right? And we were just talking last week about ransomware groups that have been flying under the radar because they're only attacking smaller firms that don't have the money to like pay a full recovery team to come in and investigate and
hundreds to maybe $1,000 or so.
Right. These tiny little ransoms that then don't get reported. And so they just flew under the radar for a long time. And Key Group isn't necessarily one of those groups, but they are a smaller ransomware group that is now getting attention. And the reason that this is interesting to me is because Grit just updated their ransomware taxonomy. So the Grit ransomware taxonomy is their classification system for groups, and it's based on where those groups sit in their maturity life cycle. So you've got things like emerging and ephemeral groups, which are very young, less than 3 months of operations. There's no real way to kind of solidly determine what their target demographic is, like what their actual goals are aside from what they just blatantly state, right? And these emerging groups can then move on into higher statuses, like and become established, right? So that would be something like Lockbit, like Conti, like these larger groups that have been in operation for a really long time. They can become ephemeral, which means that they showed up, they were flash in the pan, they published a bunch of victims, and then they vanished right away, right? There's all these ways that they track that. And Key Group is a smaller group, but they've been in operation for a long time, but they aren't necessarily publishing a lot of victims. And the reason that this is so interesting to me is because it seems to me that if we can focus on these groups that are emerging and these smaller groups before they get really huge, and say, oh, before their methodology gets super sophisticated, before they develop these Lockbit style tools, let's just attack them and release a decryptor to just break their operations and hope that they kind of break up and dismantle and fade into oblivion. That's why this story really stuck out to me.
Well, I'll tell you why the story stuck out to me after you shared it over was the fact that they used a base64 encoded static key to encrypt victims' data. So two things there. One, static key. We see this all the time in hardware vendors and software vendors where a key is embedded and it is discovered, and that is completely free game. It's like instant root. But this one particularly is that they used a static key for the encryption aspect, and furthermore, base64 encoded. Come on, that's not that crazy here. And so once that was discovered by researchers, by looking at the code and kind of pulling this thing apart, they said, okay, I think, we've got something here. And it also appears that the threat actors tried to introduce randomness by implementing a salt. But also it just so happens that that salt was also static.
It was also static. They introduced a single grain of salt.
Let's do an encryption process using a identical static key, and then furthermore we'll feel that we're clever by salting it, but also use a static salt. There's nothing dynamic about that. So it was only a matter of time before researchers were able to reverse engineer and discover how the encryption method was being used. Yes, it is AES, but no, it is not complex or not non-trivial by any means.
And so things that are going to be monitored after this, obviously after this key, is that the group has 2 Telegram channels, one for negotiating ransoms, and a private channel that is an invite only Telegram channel that attackers in this group use to talk about potential victims, doxing, offensive tools, and building up their TTPs and talking about what they're going to be doing. So it'll be interesting if any researchers are monitoring inside that channel, right? If they have access to that, to see how they're going to pivot now that this encryption key or this decryption key has been released. But the key group ransomware itself, it's important that this decryptor was released because their ransomware specifically uses lolbins to jump in and delete volume shadow copies and any backups made with Windows Server Backup tool. And it tries to disable Windows error recovery screen, anti-malware. It attempts to do a whole lot of things. And these are kind of standard things for malware to try and conduct, especially something like ransomware. They want to get rid of your backups and everything like that. But this being a smaller group, there may not be as much research available on their TTPs, as much attention paid to them. So getting hit by a group like this, it may be harder to find the assets and tools and information that you need to really effectively combat that. And so being able to just have a decryptor in place to be like, okay, well, you got hit by them, that's fine. go decrypt your data. But they do want to make it clear that this is still proof work. It may not apply to every single key ransomware group victim. There's no guarantee that this decryptor tool is going to work, especially now that it's out in the public. It's very likely that Key Group is going to change up their methodology.
Yeah, I did want to add one bit of technical information to that. So you mentioned something called law bins, and just for our friends listening online and in the future, law bin stands for living off the land
Mhm.
binaries. And what that implies is that rather than dropping a particular additional malicious payload onto the system that can be that can be kind of I will say looked at by anything looking at disk writes. What this particular tool is doing, and what many tools do, is they utilize a lot of the applications and binaries, which are programs in the sense, that are already on the system, and utilizing them to perform actions on their behalf. For instance, making calls out to particular types of applications that can manipulate, change, or remove files. And that's kind of what's happening here. Is so use something that already exists rather than landing something new that can be fingerprinted, identified, and seen as a disk read write.
Right. And with that bit of technical info, we come to the end of our show for the week. So thank you so much for joining us. Mark, Joshua, others, thank you for joining, giving us your feedback, and giving us some of your time on a Friday. If you're watching this in on demand later in the week or next week, thank you again for that time, and go ahead and leave comments. We still see those. If there are stories that you think are interesting, you can leave them in comments on this, and we will be able to check those next week and see if there's anything that we need to cover. But until next week, for GuidePoint Security, I have been Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you all next time. Bye.